Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Hopkins at Home series, Being Other. I'd like to thank Will, Carlton, and Tony from Hopkins at Home for all the preparation for this event and the technical support. And a special thanks to my colleague, Elena Thompson from the Office of Alumni Relations for inviting me to join this series. I want to thank our sponsors, Peabody, JHAA Affinity, Hopkins at Home, and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. My name is Katrina Caldwell, and I have the awesome pleasure of serving as the moderator today, as well as the Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at Hopkins. As our top level byline says, 2020 brought us more than a pandemic. During this unprecedented time, the rights of the LGBTQIA community continue to claim the spotlight, even as the Supreme Court ruled to protect gay, lesbian, and transgender employees from discrimination based on sex. Across the US, more than 100 bills at the state level have been introduced to curb the rights of transgender people. Tonight, we have an awesome panel to lead us in a conversation about where we are, where we've been, and where we hope to go in this important conversation. Before I introduce our panel, I must first thank them for allowing me, an ally and an accomplice, to join them on this virtual stage. And now to our presenters. First, we have Aurelia Glass, alumni from Whiting's class of 2020 and SICE 2021. It's the first trans woman to graduate the SICE Masters in International Economics and Finance program, and one of the few to join a sorority at Hopkins. She currently lives in Washington, D.C., and recently accepted a position as a research assistant with the economic policy team at the Center for American Progress. Next, we have Alicia Lee, who's a graduate of the Peabody Master of Music program, 2006. BEQ Pride 40 LGBTQ Leaders Under 40 Award recipient and Kennedy Center Citizen Artist Fellow, Alicia Lee has a full circle role as an artist, arts educator, teaching artist, and policymaker, which gives her a broad perspective of the arts ecosystem. She currently serves as the Education Program Supervisor for Fine Arts Education for the Maryland State Department of Education, where she supports the statewide arts learning community and advances arts-rich, lifelong learning in and through the arts for all Marylanders across the 5 arts disciplines: music, dance, visual art, theater, and media arts. And finally, we have Dr. Michael Falk, who's a graduate of received a bachelor's degree in physics in the 1990s and a master's degree in computer science in 1991 from Hopkins before completing his PhD in physics at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Dr. Falk is a professor of material science and engineering here at Hopkins, material science and engineering, mechanical engineering, and physics at Hopkins University. He also serves as the Vice Dean for Undergraduate Education within the Whiting School of Engineering here at Hopkins, a position he has held since July 2017. Professor Falk has also been a strong advocate for diversity, particularly creating a welcoming climate for LGBTQ people within our university and the engineering and physics professions. Thank you to our guests. And we're going to get right in. We don't have a lot of time, so we want to start this rich conversation with our first question. And I will ask Alicia to start off, then I'll ask Michael to follow, and then Aurelia, if you could wrap us up with responses to the first question. Question: Janet Mock, an American writer, television host, director, producer, and transgender rights artist, activist, writes, I believe that telling our stories, first to ourselves and then to one another and the world, is a revolutionary act. It is an act that can be met with hostility, exclusion, and violence. It can also lead to love, understanding, transcendence, and community. I hope that my being real with you will help empower you to step into who you are and encourage you to share yourself with those around you. In the spirit of being real and telling your stories, could you describe or complete the following phrase and explain your response? Being a member of the LGBTQIA community in X, give a particular context, means what to you? Alicia?
Thank you so much, Katrina. I love that you have invoked Janet Mock, who is fabulous, and her wonderful show Pose just ended. And that idea of storytelling, it was a tragic ending because it's over. But what she did at the end, that beautiful way that she gave us all these beautiful endings on television to these women's stories was very transformative and powerful, right? Because we're so used to seeing the media and stories sharing violence towards queer people, towards transgender women. So thank you for starting us off with Janet and her revolutionary act of sharing her story and also sharing her vision and her fantasy with us, right? As an artist, that's a primary piece of what I feel like I do. So I would say as a queer artist, my job is to share not just to share the pain that is experienced from oppression. Often I tell people, I live at a few intersections, as we all do, as everyone does, but I live at a few intersections of oppression, right? I am a queer person, I am a Black person, I am a woman, I am a fat person. And so I see all of those intersections happening. I tell people all the time, those intersections of oppression, there is pain connected to it, but not from being the thing. Being Black is one of the most joyful experiences that I have. It connects me to community. When I think about being Black, I only think of joyful moments. The same when I think about being queer, I only think of all these joyful moments, found family, connecting with people, strangers at events, or, this connection, right? This human element. I only think of joy. The sadness and the pain is also a piece of it, but it's not from the identity. It's from the outside space. It's from the hostility that comes, but it's not a part of that pain is not a part of, for me, who I am. The joy is connected when I think of my identity. So that's what I like to share through my art making, is this joy that I feel about being identified as a queer person or being identified as a Black person. I'm happy to also invite folks in to think about ways that they can make transformation so that the world is safer for us. And then the other piece is, as a policymaker, I work in state government. I work at the State Department of Ed, right? And I oversee the fine arts programs for Maryland Public Schools. And that's another space where I bring my story and perspective to think about the school experiences of students and the ways that art making, for me, it's, music, dance, theater, visual art, media art, the way that art making can be transcendent for folks. And so what do we need to move out of the way so that children from preschool through 12th grade have the opportunity to really explore who they are and the world around them through a creative process, right? And so whether that's policies that we put in place, for instance, we put in some new policies this year around racial equity and community needs. We put in some new policies this year around the ways that fine arts programs have to account for how their programs are meeting the community needs and equity needs of their communities. Also, whether it's building professional learning opportunities. My office is so proud to have built the first of its kind professional learning opportunity for all arts educators that want to support LGBTQ plus students and families, right? There was no offering in that space before. And so just to think about, how, when I look out, my identities reminds me that all of the ideas that are great don't live inside of me. I know, because of where I come from, I know the power of community. And so as a leader, I continue to look back out to say, I want to share my story and I want to hear yours. And the power of us sharing our stories together, that radical act of sharing, allows me to be a better leader and to show up bigger, right, and more inclusive in my practice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Michael?
Oh, that's a great way to start. Thanks, Melissa. And, I was thinking as you were talking that, we each come from our own perspective, professional perspective. And, I was going to start with being a member of the LGBTQIA community in Whiting School of Engineering, and then talk about building, where you talked about sharing. And I think, that sharing and building, we each bring our sort of way of accessing the world. But I think thinking as a higher education professional and as an engineer, we have to think about how we're constantly building an inclusive community. That I think one of the things I think I struggle with as I get older and more set in my ways is that, you tend to, I think, invariably think of the experience in the world as your own experience. And you have to keep in mind that you're just seeing a small corner of reality. And especially at a place like Johns Hopkins, we're constantly bringing in hundreds and thousands of people every year into the institution, and they're having to access the institution, and they're all coming from all those various different places. And I think we don't always, manage to bring the level of intentionality we need to how do we get them ready to be part of this diverse community of people who are going to work together to learn, to build, to devise new solutions to societal problems. And it's only if we, give them the tools to do that, to have those interactions in a respectful and responsible way, that we're going to have a successful university and a successful society. And so, I think that that's something that's constantly in my mind as we go about things. Like right now, we're like trying to figure out how to reconstruct the academic advising system within engineering. And part of that is being more intentional about how we provide support to first generation and limited income students and students coming from different perspectives such as that. And I think, as we go through that process, focusing in on all those various student perspectives is really important.
Wonderful. Before I get Aurelia, I just want to remind the audience that you can use the Q&A section. So please, if you have questions while we're speaking, please feel free to use the Q&A. Aurelia?
Yeah, thank you. I like how both of you came up with verbs to kind of describe what it's like to be LGBTQ in your own spaces. And I think insofar as I can answer this question, because I only just started working in progressive policy like 4 days ago, but insofar as I can speak to that, being queer in progressive policy, to me, it's a lot of improving. It's a lot of showing not just that you can talk the talk, but also that you can kind of walk the walk. It's definitely one thing to say, that you want to improve these communities, that you want to help marginalized people, but it's another thing entirely to actually say boots on the ground, what's going to make a huge difference? What's the most impactful policies? How can we actually try to implement those things? And it's one thing I'm very excited to be a part of now. And there's a lot of different elements that go into that. I like Alicia talking about intersectionality, because there's usually so many intersectionalities between LGBTQ identity and a lot of other issues in the policy space, between workers' rights, those kinds of things. And Michael as well talking about understanding that your own experiences might not be universal. Things that might have made a huge difference in your own life might not make so much of a difference in another queer person's life. And things that matter to them might not really be experience that you put into your own work. So understanding that there's a lot to learn, I think it kind of inspires a sense of humility as far as understanding that, even as members of the queer community, we're all kind of students of the queer community in a way, learning about other people's narratives and integrating those into our own work. So.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have the sharing, building, improve, empowering. So that's powerful to think about the ways in which we're active in the space. And all of you talked a little bit about policy and implications of policy. So most recently, you all know that there have been headlines, and some of those headlines sort of give us an idea of change, so the promise of change. When we read the top headline, we think, okay, this is a step in the right direction. But then you read the subtext, right? The implications of that, conversations about state rights and national rights, and conversations about the implications of, or whether it's far-reaching or whether or not it's going to be, felt by all communities equally. So having those conversations, but there is progress. We want to note the progress. So could each of you sort of speak to where you've seen progress, in what spaces you've seen them, and then maybe what needs to be more? Michael talked a little bit about things they're doing, but there needs to be more built on that. So does anyone else want to sort of speak to that, the progress they've seen and what needs to happen next?
I could speak a little bit about, I was part of a project with the American Physical Society to interview physicists and survey physicists about their workplace experiences. And I think one of the things that brought to mind is your question really focuses in part on firsts. And I think we do tend to get very tied up in firsts. But I think, maybe we need to spend more time thinking about lasts. Like, because what was clear in the data we collected about the physicists was that, it really depends on where you are. The landscape is so heterogeneous. Some workplaces are very accepting, very open. People feel like they can be themselves, bring themselves 100% to work. And then the same identity person in a different workplace may feel entirely closeted, like a threat at every moment. And it was also such a differential impact depending on gender, and particularly for trans people in the physics workplace. It was a very different level of hostility that they tended to experience. So, I think, we need to think about who's being left behind as we make progress.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can sort of piggyback on that a little bit, one of my big pet peeves as someone with an economics background is how a lot of times we kind of just don't know. There isn't a lot of great data on a lot of LGBTQ communities, especially the trans community in particular. I mean, who knows how much trans people make on average? These are questions that we don't really have good answers to. And it's important as far as trying to inform, where can we actually kind of target things that'll make a difference for people. So it's definitely an important, aspect of work that needs to be done. And I think a larger sort of part of this picture, at least for me, is understanding that, a lot of times it could be sort of nice to envision progress as something that is continual. It's always happening. The world is always kind of getting better for a lot of people. But it's a progress. It's a process that requires a lot of hard work. It requires, a lot of intention from people who are really trying to make a difference and, fight back against places where our, rights are being taken away from us, and places where, things are actually regressing. So it's something to keep in mind that it's, progress is the product of a lot of very hard work.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And when we don't have that data, as we know, then it's hard to make change. So we work very closely with GLSEN, who are the national advocates for gay and lesbian alliance groups and LGBTQ plus students. We work very closely with them. And so they're creating tons of data, very rich data that helps us to prove our case on why we need to put extra supports. When we talk about equity, usually we're talking about more supports, right? So why we need to put extra supports in place to assist LGBTQ plus students as they traverse from P to 12, right? And families as well. So that's really helpful. But what's very interesting is, in my job, in the pre times, I would visit about 100 to 125 schools a year. And everywhere I would go, I would ask to speak with students. Elementary school students, middle school, high school. I would also ask to speak with parents. And what's very clear, there's a few things that are very clear, that the stories that I remember from being in high school and middle school, not a lot has changed. Students are still experiencing trauma. Teachers are still, because I believe teachers do love their students and want to do the best by their students. Teachers are still conflicted with how to best support folks, and they don't have a clear understanding of what the policies are in place to protect them as they protect their students. And so all of that is, by design. So we're just trying to add more clarity to the water. These are the policies that are in place. These are the ways that you are protected. These are the expectations that we have for you in terms of protecting your students, supporting your students. And these are some of the tools or strategies that you could use. And that clarity, I think, gives people a lot of hope. But what students tell us, bar none, is that they, of course, they notice very early on how differently they're treated in schools. And at the same time, that what the hopeful piece is that they're noticing how accepting in many places, and in many places not, but I hear these wonderful stories about peers and allies, right? And young people I always tell people, young people are better than us by design. And so they are really pushing. We see it's not just, I know that it's gay straight alliance, but often those gay straight alliances are places for LGBTQ kids to find a safe haven, right? So, but what we're seeing is young people, again, are better than us. They're looking to a better world. They're envisioning a better world, and they're also pushing for the adults to do better. And so, so that's really exciting, right? To hear their voices calling for change and figuring out ways that we can best make that happen.
Thank you. So you shared your watching Pose in, sadly, that many folks see those moments, shows like Pose and others. I talked about HGTV with a colleague of mine just earlier today, that there was a lot of effort in HGTV, which I spent a lot of time. I can't build a thing. Want to buy all the houses, but can't, right? On there. But spent a lot of time on there, but there was a lot of recognition of the LGBTQIA community in HGTV. So you're seeing a big shift, cultural shift, what would be perceived as inclusivity in the culture. What are the upsides of that? I mean, what are some of the maybe downsides of that? The perception that these issues are being mainstream. So what are the upsides and downsides of that? Who wants to go first?
It's such a great question. It's such a great question. I was just talking to a panel today about rainbow capitalism. That concept that lots of companies during the month of June jump in, and I've been guilty of it. Every year I used to buy the Converse sneakers that they would put out, the different rainbow sneakers, and this year I was like, enough is enough. Not buying the sneakers. So this idea of, it's so interesting. We're so interested in being mainstream sometimes. And when we mainstream, we have to understand that things get lost. And our most vulnerable folks get lost. I was explaining to a group of people recently about, when we work in social impact work, we make an analysis. Right. This is, Black queer feminist thought stuff. We make an analysis. Who is the most impacted? And we work for them. And they were like, but that doesn't make sense. That's the smallest group. I was like, I know it doesn't make sense with the way we've been taught about capitalism. So this idea of going to when we mainstream, we start to shed some of our identity. I envision a world where the mainstream doesn't exist. Mainstream often means straight and white. And so, instead of mainstream, like lots of streams, like the way the earth is made, lots of streams, lots of ponds and bodies of water to kind of jump in, and celebration of many identities. But I do, we've all seen the way that pride parades have changed, and they look very much more like malls. There's a lot of logos at the parade. So, that is something. But this idea of, because I also agree with celebration and us getting to celebrate, but we can't remember that the most marginalized among us, the folks who are the hardest hit when employment laws don't change, right? Right. The folks who are the most likely to be murdered in high numbers, right? And I was just watching the Black Queer Town Hall, and the number is double at this moment. We've seen transgender women, the number has doubled in terms of murder victims today as it was last year at the same time. So we still have a lot of work to do, right? We still do deserve to celebrate. So we still deserve to rest. And all of that is possible. But I think, we just want to, it's important that that idea of nothing for us without us is always at the forefront of people's minds, that it doesn't become something where suddenly people are erased out of the picture completely. I was just thinking about Lil Nas X and in his career, and this idea, country music was created, invented by Black people. And so this idea that it would be strange for a Black person to be a country singer is so hilarious, but that's what happens when you mainstream. That years later, people look back and go, what are you doing here? You're like, I made this. This is my thing, right? So we want to prevent that from happening. We want to make sure that we stay rooted in gay liberation and in freedom and justice. We want to stay rooted in those pieces. So
wonderful. Thank you for that, Aurelia. I want to ask a question from our audience of you, new in the policy space, but I know you've been thinking about these issues. What was your reaction to the recent policies related to healthcare access for trans minors?
Yeah, well, I can never say I'm a fan of restricting access to healthcare policy for transgender people. It's hard not to see it as, a personal individual civil liberties thing. It should be up to an individual and their doctor and their family to work together to try to decide what kind of treatment plan is right for an individual. And trying to limit that from a state level is really only going to end up harming. It's really only going to end up harming the people that it's supposed to protect. Yeah, so I personally, I can't say I really endorse trying to restrict healthcare access. That's definitely something that should be really up to the person who's going through the process themselves and their support network.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. We have 5 minutes left. Yeah, how fast this time goes. I told you before we all go to our breakout room. Michael, I will ask you in closing, then I'll give everyone else an opportunity to answer this question. What message do you want to share with our audience about what they might do to support LGBTQIA rights? Or, if we have allies or accomplices in the room, what does allyship or accomplishment look like for you in the higher ed space?
I mean, I think the great thing about the whole queer umbrella or the LGBTQIA umbrella, however you want to refer to it, is that we get to be compatriots with so many different kinds of people. But I think at the same time, we have to realize that sometimes you need to be the one who's stepping back and asking, what is it you need? And letting, others take point in determining what the priorities are. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we all have to learn in our work together, how to do that.
I think it's important to remember with allies are appointed, not by self. So if you're an ally, somebody will tell you. And I like the word accomplish so much. It's like, yes, ride or die with me. Let's get to the finish line of this thing. Don't jump out. Do it with me. Accomplice makes me think we're robbing a bank, and that makes me excited. Let's rob the bank of oppression. Let's go in and steal all of the resources that keep people from being able to live their best lives. Let's do that.
Every time I'm on a call with you, there's some title of a book. Rob the bank of oppression.
Rob the bank.
I love that. I love it.
So I love that piece. And the last piece about being an accomplice is just about remembering, show up. Yes, show up and do your best not to make your accomplishment transactional. Yes, sometimes people might hurt your feelings because somebody might say something to you like fall back. and that's hard to hear. Sometimes our egos get bruised when we're doing social justice work and working with people. Sometimes things might get a little hairy, but just figure out ways that you can lean into discomfort in those moments so that you're not pulling your accomplishment back when the going gets tough. Let's ride it till the wheels fall off and change the world.
Aurelia.
Yeah, I like that. I would just like to add that it's, allyship isn't just sort of a set of things that you do. It's not like a checkbox of, just going down the list, making sure, you have your pride flags out for, July or June, that kind of thing. It's a frame of mind. It's understanding that, LGBTQ issues affect so many different areas of life, affect so many different walks of life, in the workplace, in healthcare, all kinds of different places outside from just, just the sort of places that are kind of appointed by what a lot of times we think of allyship. So just, understanding that there's always queer people to support. There's always people who need that kind of help and need that assistance. And there's a lot of different ways that they can be helped. And so I think that once you sort of start to pay attention for it, you start to see it a lot more.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we have about 60 seconds left with our audience, and we're going to transition to our breakouts. I'm going to ask if we have the link, if we can make that link available for folks on the breakout call. I'm sure my technicians will soon tell me that we're going to be out, but I want to thank you all so much. Those of you who are in the audience, even those of you who are not going to join us for the breakout, thanking you for, this opportunity to have this start of a conversation. And for many people, it's a continuation of a conversation. As you saw from the bios of those on this call, that they've been dedicated to this space for their lives and careers, and they're making a huge difference. And couldn't be more pleased and to be allowed to be in this space with them, as they just share just the tip of the iceberg of the work that they're doing in the space. We had sharing, building, improving, talking about rob the bank of oppression, lots of streams, not just the mainstream, but lots of streams, the power of community, the radical act of sharing, thinking about the different ways in which we access the world, the pain